And so there he served a few years as the representative of the Florentine. So again, Italy at this time is city-states. It's not like unified. Italy is not unified until 1862. And so you have sort of different regions that see themselves as states. And so, for example, there was a Florentine Republic, Florence. There were other republics like Sardinia, kingdoms, papal states, and so on. So Italy was quite a bit disunited. And so he held a number of positions, including head of the chancellery, or sort of like the Secretary of State, so in charge of foreign affairs in subject territories. He held diplomatic positions to France, and again, you can see he was a very colorful person. Dismissed from office, jailed for 3 weeks, accused of treason and other things. And so the Prince is really written from him, Machiavelli, to Lorenzo de' Medici, who was actually a very famous, wealthy benefactor in sort of the ruler of Florence. We can't really get into the Italian. There's just so much that was going on, including with the Pope and Cesare Borgia and other people. And so we want to maybe just think about the Prince. And so Machiavelli writing the Prince, it's sort of like he's fallen from grace and now he wants, so it's basically he's kowtowing to the Medicis. He is writing about the qualities, the best qualities, or the things that the Lorenzo de' Medici was doing, sort of like to carry his favor. And so his goal is to become an advisor. And you actually see this, like a lot of former administration officials will usually write things after they are done serving, either flattering of the people they served or sometimes just trying to explain their decisions. Perhaps the most prolific was Henry Kissinger, wrote about 25, 30 books about the Cold War and post-Cold War. So you can sort of see Machiavelli's writings in this kind of context. And so Medici, governor of Florence, and so according to Machiavelli, who is the best ruler? And so we can't necessarily say that the Prince or the Medicis were the best rulers. And again, this is why we say, take these modern theories, political theories, with a bit of salt. Why is he writing this? And so he's concerned with two things. One, the stability of government in acquiring and maintaining power for the Prince. Now, he uses the Prince generally as a ruler. So we sort of think, where we asked, for example, who is the best ruler, philosopher kings, Machiavelli's answer would be the Prince. But so what qualities does the Prince have to have? So now, again, he contributes a bit to, or at least we analyze politics from Machiavelli and we think about power. So countries are concerned with power. Rulers are concerned with power. They want to get as much as they can. They're also concerned with alliances. So sometimes you have, and I don't know if you often associate some stuff we study here with what goes on in the world in real time. So this weekend, there was a leading presidential candidate who said some things about NATO. Did you hear what he said? That if Russia invades a NATO country, that is not, so NATO countries are supposed to spend at least 2% of their GDP on defense, and few of them do, like 10 out of 30. So he was like, if they are not paying, maybe Russia should invade them. And it's sort of like, why would you say that? Why would you think that? Also, why would you say it loud?
Extortion almost, ain't it?
Oh, it's the mafia. It's like the 80s New York. Like, construction permits you have to pay.
Right, that don't make sense. Like in order us,
Like, that's not how alliances work.
right. That's like talking about, well, if my friend don't call me today, I don't care who go over there and beat them up.
Exactly.
That's crazy.
So that
Who said that? What
I this only really two, but he also said that no,
Trump said that. Shut up, he said that.
But he also trash talked Nikki Haley's husband, who is deployed to Djibouti. So he implied he was missing, like he left. It's like,
The man, 1 second you can defend him, and then the next second he say something like that. You can't. He too erratic.
he speaks what he thinks, and maybe that's not what we should do. Like, but especially when you're a leader, when you have alliances, like you can't say you'll tell people to invade. Like,
That's exactly why he on trial now for the insurrection. That kind of proves
but he might
case, though.
he might win that. He'll win that.
I mean, it looked like he may, but my point is, that's the reason why we actually went after him. So for him to turn around and make that statement, you kind of proving the reason why we went after him in the first place. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, he did say that, and then he talks about Nikki Haley's husband, and usually the military doesn't interfere in politics, but the husband tweeted it was a weekend. It was a weekend, and but so anyway, when we think about, like, you're right. If and I don't advocate for fighting, but you can say if your friend is in trouble, if they don't like send you birthday gifts, you're not going to bail them out, like that. Anyway, so alliances are important until they are not. And so when we sort of think about what we, like the values that we borrow, and these are the philosophies that we are talking about, like what should we know about alliances? How should we conduct our alliances? Should we hold them to? Now, I'm not going to defend him. However, I am going to say that there's something called free riding. So imagine, so the US has nuclear weapons and it's allies with certain countries. And so there are countries that don't have to even have militaries. As long as you're allied with the US, you are cool with them. Like South Korea is right next to North Korea, which has nuclear weapons. So South Korea doesn't have to have nuclear weapons because they are under the nuclear umbrella of the US. So you can look at that as like maybe free riding. You're benefiting from someone doing something. Or let's say, your neighbor down the street is richer than you, and so he has the road paved. You're going to use the road, so, but I don't think that that's necessarily what alliances do. People are contributing, and so in Machiavelli's view, you look for power so that you are safe from being attacked by other powers, but you also look for alliances so you can maybe mitigate other powers. And if you actually look at history, this is what put down Germany, Japan, and Italy. Like, alliances are important. So we do borrow some of that. Now, but the other question is, what does he think about morality, or what does he argue? And again, today we have these ideas, questions over whether morality should be a concern in politics. Now, Machiavelli says it's not. I don't know if that is necessarily true. And so instead of morality, he talks about power, security, and control. He's an example of where that might apply. So most people are troubled by the Israeli-Palestinian conflict right now and the deaths. And now, if you take the Palestinian side, morality is important. You can't be killing women and children like that. That's just not. But if you take the Israeli side, it's about security. And so the question is, how can Israel assure its security? Now, I'm not even taking a position on this, but if Israel calculates that power, security, and control are what is necessary for the country to exist, then they will do those things even when it violates morality. Um, but according to Machiavelli, leaders should not worry about morality. If it's immoral, but it serves the interests of the state, then it's. I don't know how we should think about that today. And sometimes we sort of, in thinking about history, if you think about the U.S. and in Iraq, was power, security, and control, were they really key issues? Or was it even fair to go into Iraq? Now, again, you and I, we don't make these decisions, but what informs the people who make these decisions? I am sure probably every person who is in Congress has read The Prince. And what lessons do they take from them? But so this is what Machiavelli is arguing. Power and control are important. Morality is unimportant. He actually then becomes a little confusing because he says virtue is vice and vice is virtue. Like it's not even about virtue and vice, but virtue can be a vice and vice can be virtue. It's good for a prince to be virtuous, but it is not possible. That there are always people who need to be dealt with by through power. And so if we think about our good friend, so vices, like when you leverage other people for stuff, for them to spend money before you can defend them, that is probably a vice. But also if you leverage money from Saudi Arabia, then that is, so you can't be virtuous. That's what he's basically saying, which I don't. Now, I don't know famous people or wealthy people or famous politicians, but sometimes you can see being virtuous is impossible. Think of, for example, presidential pardons, right? Like the reason a person is getting a pardon is they have committed a crime for which they have been mostly found guilty. And so should they get pardons or should they serve the time? Should they pay for the crime?
That's
And
a toss up right there though. Because sometimes just because you're found guilty does not mean you are guilty.
yeah, I was thinking of a certain Paul Manafort who, not sure if you know who he was, but he was working for like Ukraine, and he was, so you're supposed to register as a foreign agent if you're working for a foreign government. He did not, and he was working for Ukraine, influencing the American government. Now, you're right, like, but also sometimes the question of whether the crime fits the punishment. Now, that is a good debate to have. And if we're talking about virtue in that context, I think arguably you shouldn't jail someone because they committed one dumb crime 40 years ago. But I don't know that necessarily this is, this is what
Name Paul, who
Manafort.
is he?
He was
Nationality.
he's American. He was an advisor
What's his race?
to a former president.
Is he black?
No.
Oh. What is that?
Well-
No, because I asked that question because we tend to get disproportionate sentences, and that's
Yeah.
what made me ask that question.
Yeah. No, he's
Because they normally get a
Yeah.
slap on the hand, whereas we get the maximum sentence.
Yeah. So again, when you think about that, but the question is, are we then suggesting that morality is important in politics, or the law is important? Because if the law says,
He was a lobbyist.
yeah, but then now when we think about the law, we have to maybe go back to Rousseau and say the law is the general will. But what is the general will? Whose will is it? Because the general will is not the general will. I mean, the people who made the constitution in this country, they can't say that was the general will. It was the general will of the men. So, again, we begin to question, is the law even fair? So that we can then say that the sentences are proportionate, which they are not. So then maybe we should begin to question Machiavelli in him saying that virtue is impossible for the prince. Mr. Trump did a thing, and I think when people do the right thing, they should be commended. When he the sentencing reviews that were done, and this woman who had been in jail for like forever, and I think he commuted her sentence to, I forget, but I think her name was Johnson or someone.
Was she from here?
She was black actually.
But was it was somebody who was from here who got part in that.
I forget where she was from, but it was clear that there are people who are in jail for. But also, when you think about, for example, now that certain substances have been decriminalized, and people have been in jail for the same.
I thought it was about the same person. She had a drug charge.
Yeah.
And it had something to do with the boyfriend.
But it was probably a federal charge. Yeah.
It was, and it had something to do with the boyfriend who was trafficking drugs. And she was from here.
She was from here.
Yeah, she even went off state. She was right. She got sentenced like to the highest of the sentencing. But she didn't really have anything to do with it. But they charged her as conspiracy. And conspiracy. Yeah. You might as well do crime. You get a conspiracy charge. But she had been in jail for a long time.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So when you sort of now begin to think about virtue, I think we would say it's maybe is it virtue or justice, or correcting an injustice. But so again, when we talk about these issues, we have to question some of the positions that these philosophers take. Can a prince be virtuous? I think princes can be virtuous, leaders can be virtuous, probably not most of the time, and they're probably committing other crimes. But I don't think that we should exclude completely the possibility of being virtuous, or at least seeking justice where injustices have been committed. But then we face the question, is virtue the same as justice? And it is not clear that it is. But so according to Machiavelli, the world is really not concerned with virtues or ideals when you're dealing with other countries. And there's a reason for that. So internationally, the state of nature is more applicable than perhaps within nations. So we talk about the concept of anarchy, and anarchy is not necessarily chaos. It's the absence of authority or government to regulate other governments. Now, these governments regulate violence between individuals, but there's no government internationally. Even though some people would like to think that the UN is a government, it really is not. The UN is housed in New York. So the international politics is more challenging because there's no government. And so we do see the argument that the world is not concerned with morality. However, even though there is no government to tell other governments what to do, we still have, so nobody can convince me that, for example, Germany doesn't have the technology to make nuclear weapons, or Japan. Countries can choose certain things, Costa Rica, for example, doesn't have a military, which is sort of like they don't have a military. Why would any country choose that? So the world is not just chaos. In this, countries are not just always looking to fight. The world may not be concerned with morality, virtue, or ideals, but it often conducts itself as if there's a morality or virtue. And in fact, if you think about, for example, Europe, if a person commits a crime for which they are likely to face the death penalty in the US and they flee to Europe, Europe will not extradite you back to the US because they object to the death penalty. Now, that is a morality question. And so I don't know that Machiavelli was completely right to suggest that the world is not concerned with morality, virtue, or ideals. I think it is. But he also makes a very contentious argument that that a prince can rise to power through crime, that the ends justify the means. And so if our good friend had quoted Machiavelli, I think, he was trying to stay in power through crime, I think. But so Machiavelli argues that the end justifies the means. Machiavelli is very troubling in some instances. So when he talks some more on virtue, he talks about moralistic virtue being impossible because you have to deal with threats from inside and outside. And so you can't just be thinking about virtue. You have to think about what is good for the country, and that virtuous leaders can be considered naive and are easily exploited. And so he talks about virtue, which is kind of slightly different from virtue. And so he describes leaders who are industrious, well learned of politics, who are able to gauge friends and enemies, who are cunning, skilled in war and politics, not dependent on advice and powers of others, and get a power base built on charisma and leadership qualities. I think some people, practically every leader would want to see themselves that way. Now, if you look at Machiavelli's list, I think we see elements of philosopher kings. They are industrious and well learned of politics. So it's almost like he is hearkening back to the Greeks, and now they are cunning, skilled in war and politics. The philosopher kings were supposed to be well studied and had been war for about 25 years, and they are not dependent on power and advice of others. So you can actually see elements of maybe philosopher kings that he doesn't come out and say they should be philosopher kings. Now, we have to remind ourselves that what he's really extolling the qualities of Lorenzo de' Medici. Like, that's really what he's doing. He is hyping him up. He's kind of like the hype man. And so he talks about how a prince comes to power. It's almost like the to-do list of the bad things leaders should maybe have done. And so he talks about getting a kingdom, making sure that the kingdom doesn't have like powerful barons and ministers, and so this is 1500. So most of the militaries were mercenaries. And so he says, first thing you should avoid doing, don't depend on mercenaries because they go to the highest. Now, this country has a volunteer military, but if you do remember the Iraq War, there was a significant use of what is called PMCs, private military companies. And the question is, who should fight? Now, if you go back maybe 50 years ago, during the Vietnam War, the draft, which caused all kinds of of challenges. But so this is the 19th and 20th centuries and 21st centuries, there has been more of volunteer national militaries. But the 1600s mercenaries, they take the highest pay, and that's what they do. But he also talks about being careful conquering others. Choose a land without powerful kings and barons or ministers. And if you look at, it's almost like countries unwittingly take the advice of Machiavelli without actually saying we are following what Machiavelli says. Like if you look at most of the major invasions, it's usually like a big country invading a smaller country. Maybe Russia and Ukraine, actually that is a good example because Ukraine has no nuclear weapons and Russia does. 2008, Russia invaded Georgia, a small country. But also the US has done some shady things to that extent and invaded Grenada in 1983. And I don't think most Americans would even find Grenada on a map. Or Nicaragua. Well, not full invasion, but so it's almost like you are, when you're invading a country, you want to invade a country that isn't that powerful. Now, nowadays, you find the problem of alliances because alliances, like when Kuwait was invaded, it's the international alliance that kicked Iraq out. But he also says that the prince should kill anyone who may oppose them before continuing, which is not, I don't think you should go killing people. However, it is not that people don't get killed. Actually, people do a lot. There's a study that once showed that the job with the highest mortality rate is the leader of a country. Many of them get killed in coups and other things. So he says to kill anyone who may oppose you before continuing, which is Machiavelli is. So then he has a prescription for keeping your kingdom secure. Do not allow powerful states to develop in the neighborhood. And so you can actually see elements of this practiced. The Cuban Missile Crisis, 1962, do not allow the Soviet Union in the backyard of the United States. Eliminate powerful states because they might attack. Make friends with your neighbors, so alliances with Canada and Norway and Mexico, maybe. But he also makes clear that the prince should maintain a reputation for being awesome. Your people should not hate you, but if they do, oh well, let them grumble a little, not too much, because then they might kick you out of power. And so he actually points to Cesare Borgia, who may have been a pope, or the House of Borgia had a pope. And Cesare Borgia was, recorded to be cunning, cruel, and a vicious politician. Dispatched his enemies, but eventually, so that's kind of how he stays in power. But then we have to ask, if you're that kind of leader, aren't you always worried about your enemies? Now, if we are talking about Western democracies, this is probably not such a problematic issue. And of course, some politicians are cunning, they are cruel, they are vicious. And, we always say politics is vicious. And you look at campaigns and it's just, it can be ugly. But so it's almost like he's prescribing things that are impossible. How can you be awesome but also be vicious? Or you can be awesomely vicious. Cruel, cunning, vicious, you're despised. But if you can be awesome, like how can you be these things? So it's almost like Machiavelli was looking at Medici and saying, these are the things you are, these are the things you need to be in order to stay in power. Now, again, we need to think about Machiavelli with a grain of salt. He had a very specific agenda, which he pursues relentlessly. Talks about raising taxes. If you do raise taxes, don't raise them too high because people will revolt. You might lose the citizen support, and that might weaken but also, give away some money here and there. Give people, be known to be generous. Reward the military. So don't keep all the money for yourself. So you have their support and they don't turn against you. Now, some of these are actually very interesting and maybe valid points, but he also talks about politicians being alert to opposition growing within their kingdom, because you did murder the people who opposed you, but other people could rise and they would still be. And so this is what often we term as political realism. Now, realism kind of really looks at the relationships between countries rather than individuals. But there's an element of realism that says that human beings are vicious, they are self-centered, they're self-interested, they will pursue their own interests. And so if you sort of think about these things that he is talking about in terms of the prince, you can transpose them to the country. So countries should pursue power, their own interest, the idea that only they can help themselves if push comes to shove.
Well, in that explanation, that was the Bushes. That was their presidency. Like, we ain't have to go over there. They said we were searching. What they said we were searching for oil.
No,
something like that.
Weapons of mass destruction.
That's what it was. But it was oil that we was actually looking for. Like, all of that was self-interest.
But did they really believe that there was weapons of mass destruction?
I don't think so.
Like, you think they knew?
What I'm saying is, I don't think that they believed it was weapons of mass destruction. Because don't forget, the daddy was trying to invade over there in the first place. Then when the son came in, the son took over from the same standpoint that the daddy was trying to originally do. You know what I'm trying to say?
But
it won't no weapons of mass destruction.
Kids must outdo their fathers.
I mean, I think he was doing his dad's own agenda, but while doing his dad's own agenda, he got big headed. You know what I'm saying? And went off on his own. And that's what I think that happened. But I mean, I can understand that standpoint, because we had a lot of presidents that had self-interest in what their agenda was versus the country. We just had one, Trump. We just seen him talking about it. You know what I mean?
Some people would say Biden is, was involved in his son's business.
I'm telling you, he did, and that's why I'm stating. At the end, I'm gonna tell you right now, if Trump do get into presidency, they're definitely going to investigate the relationship between the Bidens and Ukraine. We are giving too much money to the Ukraine.
So
this is unprecedented, the amount of money we're giving.
When the previous presidency ended, Saudi Arabia gave $2 billion to the Kushner family to do investments. So the question.
And they probably gave it to that family because they couldn't give it directly to Trump, since he married to her daughter.
So then we get back to the biblical question, or the phrase, "Let him who is without sin cast the first stone." I don't. Now, I would probably think that Obama didn't take money from somebody, but if you go back to, like, who hasn't taken money? So maybe Machiavelli is right in this self-interest and those kinds of things. Now,
Everybody that took money, because that's why they said Kennedy got killed.
Kennedy took money?
They said, yeah, because they wanted Bobby to be the president, right?
Mm.
And Bobby wasn't presidential. I guess that's the word you want to use, since he wasn't presidential. So Kennedy was taking money he was supposed to do things for certain companies that he did not follow through in doing. And plus he was also too soft on the advancement of color people. He did a lot of breaking bread behind the scenes with what's his name? Martin Luther King and that coalition, and he didn't. Well, I ain't saying they killed him, but he didn't follow through on some of the things that he was supposed to do for us because he was doing things for other individuals. And then next thing you know, he did.
I would have thought that whatever the reason for his part of why he was breaking bread was that the US was losing all of Africa. Not that it cared or cares,
Right.
but in the bigger global geopolitical game of, who has more influence, the Soviet Union had a very interesting point. Like, how are you a democracy and you have a whole bunch of second-class citizens?
Right.
And these new countries are kind of look like your second-class citizens, so how are they going to be on your side? In fact, it's recorded that Khrushchev in like 1960, so every September, leaders of the world come to the UN and make speeches and do those kinds of things. And so Khrushchev chaired the Security Council just to dig at the US and its allies. The French, of course, they had colonies. The British had colonies. So he's like, the only good guys around here are China and the USSR. We do not have colonies. We do not discriminate against people. We have equality. And so Kennedy is like, we are losing this whole global argument because African diplomats didn't even want to come to DC because you're a diplomat. You're the representative of your leader in that country, and you're going to sit in the back of the bus and go to the restaurant through the back door.
Right.
Which is exactly what you had been fighting in your country for the past 60 years. So that wasn't off. Of course, that feels like it's taking away from the civil rights movement. But like there was global and local pressures for now. There's all kinds of conspiracies about Kennedy. Was it because he was a Catholic? Was it?
But you gotta know it had something. Well, let me say this. Not you gotta know if you're a conspiracy theorist, but how both of the brothers.
Mm.
You know what I'm saying? It's bigger than.
Well, some people point to the tragedy, like the Greek tragedies of, because they had another maybe brother who crashed in.
They had one. That was you talking about John Jr. He crashed in a plane, but I'm talking about the two that got killed by assassination.
Yeah.
Those were the two individuals who both were supposed to be the president. They both had backhand. They had dealings with companies and individuals that they were supposed to follow through with things that they didn't follow through. So how both of them get assassinated?
So the 60s was the decade of assassinations.
Yeah.
MLK, Malcolm X, like everybody was. I don't think the world had this whole thing. Even the US, it's like a bunch of people got assassinated. But it's this. I guess we'll never know. But also there was also the issue of Southern Democrats and LBJ, and I know this is probably treacherous conspiracy territory, but yeah, it's when you sort of think about these leaders and who takes them out and what their motivations are, yeah.
They want stuff to be the way they want because they made promises that they didn't follow through with. Something, you know what I mean? That it was easier to get away with stuff back then. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there
You can't
wasn't
do that now. You got a camera everywhere.
so much screwed. But I don't know, do cameras change anything?
Yeah.
They do.
I think they do because you can get caught easier.
But then you can get acquitted. You can foment an insurrection and nothing happens.
Well, your average everyday man.
Okay, so yeah.
Yeah, not somebody on that type of level because it's always a way. You know what I mean? Money change everything. Let's put it like that. But your average everyday person, yeah, there's cameras on the street light. You know what I mean? You can get caught. It's too many ways to get caught. You got cameras on the doorbell. You know what I'm saying? It's just too many ways to get caught.
But maybe people are behaving well.
No,
No?
ain't nobody behaving well. They're just making dumb decisions. It's too many ways to get caught.
Even though there are cameras, like I'll speed, but I don't. Like when you're on campus, there's cameras everywhere, so you're not, except in class.
No, there cameras in here.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I'm telling you, it's too many ways to get caught.
But are they active? See,
Sometimes they aren't, but I feel like sometimes they are, they just don't pay attention to those.
But sometimes too,
Mhm.
at the end, some of them might not be active, but at the same time, people if you're gonna do something, you're gonna do it. You don't care about the camera, you know what I mean? You just gonna do it. However, it just makes it easier for somebody who I guess want to tell on you or prosecute you or whatever the case may be to actually do it because they now have footage of it.
Yeah.
If
Yeah,
you're gonna do something, you're gonna do it. I don't care how many cameras around. If somebody really want to do something, they gonna do it.
yeah, and say it wasn't them. But yeah, so
Until that camera footage come out. You know what I mean?
you still deny, be like,
Yeah,
me.
that's what they supposed to do. But I'm just saying.
Yeah, it's the 60s was a different period of time, but I don't think that politics has, or the deviousness of politics has changed that much. I mean, look at Nixon. All the shady stuff he was trying to do. Reagan, whether he was actually the president or it was his wife. Everybody,
All of them. We just finding better ways to catch them. Like now, it's a paper trail on everything. That's how they into Biden.
but
That's how they into these emails.
but
You know
maybe
what I mean?
yes. I mean,
Clintons,
that's
emails. You know what I'm
just
saying? Like it's just you couldn't really pinpoint those politicians back then. Now everything is a paper trail. Everything is ran through email or fax or something.
But are these actual? Well, I'm going to sound like a different group of people. Like, what's email is this? If you kill 100,000 Iraqis on a pretext of invading a country that didn't have weapons of mass destruction, I think that's a bigger issue than if you send 33,000 emails through your private email account.
I think that's also a big issue than taking classified documents home because at the end of the day, anything can be categorized a classified document. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's what the details of the classified document should actually be the question at hand. You know what I'm saying? Because the majority of their documents are considered classified. You know what I mean? But what are we really talking about in the email? I mean, in the documents. So I think they pick and choose what, I think they cherry pick what they actually want to make a big deal. Because the same reason we made a big deal out of President Trump having classified documents outside of that White House, right?
Mm-hmm.
But who did the same thing? Biden. Who else did it? Obama. But we ain't make a big of a deal as when Trump did it.
But is that because maybe he refused to like if someone catches me doing something wrong and if I confess, I might not get so much heat versus if someone catches me and then I'm like, it wasn't me.
So he arrogant anyway, you know what I mean? And I think a lot of it is we just don't like his personality.
Mm.
And the reason why I think he is just so uncouth with his behavior is because he has not been set up or groomed to be a politician. You know what I mean?
Mm.
Individuals who are set up and groomed to be a politician, they know how far to go and what lines to cross. You know what I'm saying? He just don't care. And I think that's the difference in the verbiage that we get from him. I think he just spits whatever out that he wants.
Mhm.
However, other people who are truly politicians, they carefully word the things that they are saying. But everybody's saying the same thing. It's just his verbiage is just completely raw. You know what I mean?
So are we wrong or is he in the wrong profession?
I don't think we are wrong. I think it's not what you say, it's how you say it. And I think the way he's saying it catches a lot of people off guard. Because even the statement that he made about, if you don't pay, you shouldn't get protection.
Yeah.
I think it's a better way to say that. Even if people agree with that,
Yeah.
I think it's still just a better way to word that.
Mm.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, like
But he's basically saying what a lot of people may think, but you just can't give people that wording.
so maybe this is the whole philosopher king's because you want to speak, you have to know words have meaning, and the way they come out